Shabbat Shalom. So kol hakavod to our Haftarah reader, to our Torah readers, and Gabbaim and Shamashim. Thank you for all for what you do for making our Torah service run smoothly. Sam and Abe knocked on Rabbi Levi's door. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" said the rabbi. They explained that they were in a bitter dispute and hoped that the rabbi could help them resolve it. The rabbi agreed, saying, "What's this argument all about?" Sam turned to Abe and said, "Black is a color." And Abe said, "No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is." And on it went. And so Abe turned to the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, what do you think? Is black a color?" He said, "Well," a little bit confused, "yes, it's a color." Sam jumped in. "You see? I told you so. And so is white." "No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is." And back and forth they went. And Abe turned to the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, is white a color?" The rabbi thought about it a bit. He knew the science how white is not actually on the color spectrum. It absorbs light. But in everyday parlance, he said, "Yes, white is a color." To which Sam responded in triumph, "You see, Abe, I sold you a color TV." There's black and there's white, but this morning I want to talk about the shades of gray in between. We recently painted our living room gray, so I'm actually speaking from experience. We put dozens of swatches up on the walls, and we examined this one and that one, said this one has a little bit too much blue, and that one has a little too much cream in it. So I can say with certainty that while not bright or bold, gray is a color too. And if you believe the description of the color swatch, gray is calming and sophisticated and versatile and offers vintage atmosphere. I want to talk about gray because in a world of extremes, of black and whites, I think that we need more in between. And for sure, we need more calm. I'll explain what I mean by turning to our Parsha. To God, the behavior of Sodom v'Amorah was sinful, absolute evil, and beyond repair. And so God decided to wipe the cities off the face of the earth. Since God had entered into a covenant with Abraham, God thought it would be a good idea just to give Abraham a heads up, not to get his input, but just to inform him, and we know what happens. Abraham was aghast. "God, how could you? Certainly there are innocent civilians in the towns," he argued. Abraham, he just couldn't keep his thoughts to himself, in what can only be described as an expression of holy chutzpah, he challenged God. "Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat," will not the judge of the earth do justice? In other words, how could God, who purports to do justly, acts in a way that seems patently unjust? For generations, Abraham's challenge has inspired our people. It's motivated activists to speak truth to power and to pursue justice. It has instilled a healthy dose of skepticism, of blind faith. It has encouraged people to stand firm in their convictions. But what if it wasn't a question at all, rather a statement? That's the reading of a provocative midrash. To understand it, we need a quick reminder of the rules of biblical grammar. In Hebrew, the letter He can be used to indicate a question. So, for example, yadata means you know, and hayadata means did you know? In our case, the He in hashofet is commonly understood to indicate that the verse is a question. Will not the judge of earth do justly? But it can also be read as a definite article, turning a question into a declaration. Hashvet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat. The judge of the earth shall not do justice. Now, wait a minute. In this reading, Abraham is not arguing with God. He's telling God, do not exercise your attribute of justice. He's not charging God with acting unjustly. He's actually saying that God is acting too justly. Why? I thought we liked justice. Why should God put justice aside? The Midrash continues with Abraham saying to God, if you wish to have a world, there can be no strict justice. And if you wish to have strict justice, there can be no world. You, God, are trying to hold the rope from both ends, and if you don't concede a little bit, there can be no world. Im olam ata mevakesh ein din, ve'im din ata mevakesh leit olam. As we unpack this midrash, let's just pause and notice how the idea of justice is being used here. Usually when I think about pursuing justice, I think about lifting up the oppressor. In this case, though, it's about lifting up the oppressed. In this case, though, it's about destroying the oppressor. In any case, let's concede that Sodom and Gomorrah are full of wicked people, and for justice to be administered, they need to be destroyed. Abraham objects, saying, God, if you are going to rule our world through strict justice, it will cease to exist. If you, God, pursue this extreme ideology, you're condemning all of us right now. And how does God respond to Abraham's challenge? God could have said, who is this guy who thinks that he knows better than me? He thinks he's the arbiter of justice, that he decides how the world will work? But God didn't say any of those things. Instead, the Midrash continues with God appointing Abraham to bring chesed to the world. This chesed, this loving kindness, will be a moderating force to God's strict justice, that the world might continue to exist. Of course, it's not lost on anyone that despite Abraham's plea, in the end, God still does destroy the cities. The Midrash challenges God's strict application of justice. And I'd argue that the message applies equally to a strict application of chesed, of loving kindness. If out of an overflowing of mercy there would be no real consequences for Sodom V'Amorah, so too the world would cease to exist. The Midrash, therefore, it seems to me, is calling for moderation. And it's a message that we desperately need to hear. It's a message that applies to our personal lives. Rambam famously encouraged us to find the golden mean and to walk Shvil HaZahav, the path of moderation, veering neither to the extremes, for example, neither to full abstinence nor full indulgence. And of course, it is a message that speaks to today's political landscape. For today, we are living in a time of great polarization, a time when extreme ideology is leading us down a dangerous path, when radical policies from various sides are being proposed, and a time when compromise is seen to be a dirty word. And it feels like things are falling apart because the center cannot hold. Today, in some circles, to be moderate is seen to be weak. A moderate is indecisive, lacks firm moral principles, and endorses the status quo. Not only that, moderates do not grab the headlines, nor do they gain traction on social media. And so moderation is a liability if you're trying to get noticed, say in an election when a candidate needs to stand out. Neither is moderation a useful tool when seeking to organize protests, demonstrations, or other social movements. For all of its flaws, though, moderation is essential. Compromise is crucial. First, far from being weak and wishy-washy, compromise requires courage. It relies on tolerance and humility. It begins with a willingness to embrace complexity, to reconsider, to see another perspective, to uplift the value of community. Far from a political slur, it is pragmatic, which is not such a bad thing when you really want to get stuff done. Centrism is not the middle, writes Yair Zivan in his recently published book, The Center Must Hold. Zivan was senior political advisor to Israel's opposition leader, Yair Lapid. It's not a search for some point on a map, he says, between where the left and right happen to be at any given time. That just leaves you getting dragged around from place to place by whatever political winds are. It's not useful as a political idea. It's also not successful as a political idea. Instead, he continues, centrism says, here are a core set of values that we believe should be at the center of politics. They should be the things that are at the heart of our democratic political tradition and our political instinct. Centrism is the place, he says, where you defend liberal democracy. Now, to be sure, sometimes we need the passion and the push from one side or another to make necessary and important changes. In his letter from the Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King, for example, criticized the, quote, moderation of the white man, who is just too comfortable in the status quo. And in his very next breath, King saw himself as the moderate black voice, standing between two forces, the violent black nationalists and the complacent, what he called do-nothings. It seems then that there is a time for passion and a time for temperance, a time for zeal and a time for restraint. There are true and false forms of moderation. There's no gray without black and white. A healthy family, a healthy nation is enriched by having strong, even opposing viewpoints when there is respect for values, for the rules, and respect for one another that makes for compromise possible, makes for governing possible, that makes living together possible. And let it be noted that there are dark grays and light grays, because compromise does not always have to be an even split. So what is the moderation that we need today? Aurelian Kraitu, professor at Indiana University and author of Why Not Moderation? A Letter to Young Radicals, outlines his vision saying, what we need today in our hyperpolarized world is a form of moderation that does not call for illusory forms of bipartisanship or a fuzzy center in which we would be expected to dissolve our differences. No, the moderation that we need today is a radical form that trims between the extremes without making imprudent concessions to them. It warns against any form of radical anger not backed by coherent policies based on real facts. This radical form of moderation consists in affirming one's opinions boldly, firmly, and with civility, while opposing all forms of fanaticism. It's a moderation that combines prudence and self-restraint with a sense of proportion, firmness of character. In the Midrash, Abraham criticizes God, saying, if our world devolves into extremes, including following uncompromising justice, it will not survive. And God agrees. Notice, it's not that God became more moderate. Rather, God entered into a relationship and chose a partner in Abraham whose own extreme chesed would be a moderating force. God recognized the need for moderation, and so must we. Our world does not need tepid and lukewarm souls, writes Cretu. It needs instead burning and passionate hearts, men and women who know the proper place of moderation. From black to white and all the colors of the rainbow in between, may we balance our extremes with vibrant, committed centrism, a passionate moderation in which our families and communities thrive and our world survives. Ken Ratzon Ben Amar.